I'm glad you brought up your experience at the FDA. I really wanted to ask you about that. So, I think for many people, who have a sort of typical experience of experiencing this form of suffering and then seeking professional help, as everyone suggests you should do, and meeting with a psychiatrist that is paid for through their insurance company at a hospital, and then being diagnosed with a condition and prescribed a drug. I think part of the reason that they have no hesitation to adhere to that protocol is because it's FDA approved. That stamp of approval, I think, in the minds of most Americans is very legitimizing and assuring that this is not going to be harmful. It's FDA approved. And so, can you talk to us about exactly what you just kind of alluded to, that there actually, is bias within the FDA, and so maybe like the process of approving of these drugs and what the shortcomings are in that process?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the main thing that people need to realize about psychiatric medications is they're studied for literally 3 months for their approval, which is, just let that sink in for a second. And these are drugs that potentially a fifth of the adult population in the US are taking on a daily basis. Most of them are studied for 3 months or less in clinical trials. And so if you're going to take it for 3 months or less, you could feel pretty darn safe about doing it. FDA has looked at it. They've done placebo-controlled trials. The safety data is pretty good. The problems that I see are that these drugs are not taken for 3 months. In fact, they're taken for several years. And there's a median duration of use of antidepressants for 2 years when someone takes them long term. And so I think that's the first problem there, is that we hear, approved by the FDA, safe and effective, but the part that they leave out is for the 3 months that they were studied.
Right.
And then there's this question, which is like, well, why doesn't the FDA make people study them for 2 to 3 years if that's how long they're using them for? And there's no real answer for that apart from they just haven't done it, because precedent was set way back when that it was okay to approve them with a 3-month trial. And once they do that with one drug, unless there's huge public outcry or people want to change that, all of the other drug companies do it in the same way. Statins, these cholesterol drugs, we make drug companies study them for 5 years in placebo-controlled trials. It's a huge amount of time, but it makes sense for a long-use drug. I think it's 3 to 5 years for those. And so we're just not doing that with psychiatric drugs. So the main thing I would just say is, safe and effective for 3 months, and then it starts to become a question mark. The other thing is, so after that time, all safety issues with the drugs are managed kind of in this sort of post-marketing review, where you're looking at essentially reports that are sent into the agency. So after the clinical trial is done, the drug's on the market, the FDA learns about safety issues from reports coming in from patients. And what I saw at the FDA was that there was very little review of these cases coming in, which is a shame because people are writing them in good faith and sending them in. And usually what happens to them is, someone reads them, there's not enough information in there, and they just say, let's say someone took a drug and became suicidal. They'll say, well, not enough information, unable to determine if due to the underlying condition. And the agency simply is not resourced enough or does not have the willpower or desire to actually follow up on the cases that are coming in to say, well, can we have more information? Can we talk to someone in your family? Did this acute worsening in suicidal behavior occur in the context of a stressor in your life? Really to dig into each one of these reports. I never saw that at the FDA. I didn't see a single officer ever reach out to someone who had submitted a report to gain further clarity. A lot of it was just kind of not enough information, kind of moving on. And I mean, this is another thing that's kind of interesting. FDA is mostly funded by the pharmaceutical industry. I think people don't realize that it's about 70% funded. And because of that, there's a lot of these I guess, requirements of the FDA. So when pharma submits a packet to get a drug onto the market, they have 9 months to review that, and that's how they get the funding. We're going to send you something, you have to do it in 9 months. And because of that, most of the division's resources go into doing these reviews to get drugs onto the market, and there's not a lot of time spent looking at post-marketing safety issues. And that's why we have problems right now with PSSD. Essentially, it's been ignored by the FDA for 6 years since the citizens petition came in, which is absolutely disgusting considering that they respond to pharmaceutical companies bringing new drugs onto the market in 9 months. And when someone puts in a petition about a serious adverse reaction, you just let it sit there for 6 years. They're getting sued by Public Citizen at the moment for that, thank God. And you also have issues like protracted withdrawal, which aren't really recognized. So all of these serious, kind of more uncommon, maybe more rare, you would say, serious adverse reactions, they're just missed because the agency isn't really resourced to look into them. And I also think, there's simply a defensiveness, because in the FDA, psychiatrists as well, there is a defensiveness about psychiatric meds, even within the groups that are supposed to be objective about them.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you just said that people should let really sink in. I think this might be a section of the podcast worth rewinding and listening to again, because it's just, how do we get here? How do we get here? This is such a serious problem. And to witness it play out too in real life, so to speak, I witness it in individuals that I work with. I witness it in what students share with me as in my role as a college professor. And above all, I witness this in the jails. I work in the jail system. I get to know many people very well who are doing time, and their experiences working with psychiatrists within the jail, it's infuriating, honestly. That's the emotion I am now feeling the most. It's just infuriating how poorly understood these individuals are by the psychiatrists who are prescribing them these drugs. And then, as so many people know so well, and as you described earlier, it's just so common to continuously increase the dose as the person's tolerance is increasing, and to add other drugs into the mix, which of course it's already, in my opinion, completely unacceptable the way the FDA approves of these drugs in the first place. But like the way I think of it often is the discrepancy between evidence and practice is so extreme at this point. It's so extreme because not only is there a discrepancy between the safety trials, the duration of the safety trials and the duration of how long people take these drugs in real life, but there's the discrepancy between the way that the FDA will study a drug on its own singularly, but then the way that it's so common to prescribe multiple drugs all at the same time for very long durations of time at ever increasing doses. It's just, people are the experiments, but they think that there are experiments already done showing that what they're being prescribed is already safe and effective. So it's such an extreme problem.
It's crazy.
And it's crazy.
I'm going to say some inflammatory stuff because I work for myself now. But I do feel like there are some corollaries between the kind of what we see in these prison systems and things that used to happen in Nazi Germany, because there is a willful blindness to what's going on. There's a sense of I'm just following orders, and it's very easy for me to just say, okay, this person is getting worse on these drugs, instead of being like, maybe it's a side effect. I need to spend more time digging into it. Maybe they're on a cocktail of medications, and I should think twice quickly because we don't really know what happens when people are on multiple meds. I think out of expediency, they move to say that it's related to the underlying condition, and because there's guidelines saying, just then this drug, and then this drug, and then now we're going to add this one.
Right.
That it's just easier. It's an easier way to process people through a system until they break. And I think there's a blindness to it that is really. I mean, the problem with psychiatry is there's hardly any emphasis on side effects in training. I mean, we've got a DSM out there. It's a 1,000-page book. There's like 10 pages in there on side effects. Most doctors I've spoken to, they don't even know how to find the most up-to-date FDA labels. They learn everything from their superiors, who also, tend to be, also haven't really been educated that well on side effects. And so I feel like they simply lack the training and the knowledge to pick up on these things, because we don't emphasize it as a profession. And then you have
Right.
things like what you see in the jails, where these prescribing cascades and people probably getting nuked with meds until they develop NMS, neuroleptic malignant syndrome, and other serious, potentially fatal and life-threatening complications of these meds.
Nuked with meds is a great phrase.
Yeah.
Yes.